Hello everyone, my name is Vasanta. Welcome to my YouTube channel where we use the power of Vedic astrology to have a better understanding of life. So for some time now, I've been very interested to make videos regarding what I see in the upcoming trends in the universe, in our world. So one of the things that I've been observing for some years now is how the movies that are distributed to the entire world have to do a lot with the positions of the planets. Now for some times I've been analyzing and keeping an eye, and for example, every time that Rahu and Ketu move to a different sign, usually the villains in movies, what comes out in the movies are an expression of the dragon energy, or the unconscious energy that the world itself is working with. And then the heroic energies are, of course, the presence of the Sun and Jupiter and the benefic planets. So today, with great joy, I must say, we're going to be analyzing Dune. The reason why I'm analyzing Dune is because, it's a very famous novel. Those who know say that it's the best sci-fi novel ever written. There's an insight to this, so we're going to make an in-depth description of what's going on in the astrological pattern. The reason why I'm choosing to start with this series is because while I was looking at the premiere of the Dune movie, it struck me how accurate Vedic astrology can be when it comes to interpreting reality and what the universe is trying to tell us. There's a message in the storytelling. And so in this case, we're going to find out how it is. I'm going to be using the traditional technique that we use when my clients come here to see me in a personal consultation. So I'll be describing my methodology and how I go step by step by interpreting an event. So we'll also have some predictions, how the movie is going to do in the box office. Is it going to win Oscars or not? What about the characters? Can we see them in the astrological chart? In what way the novel has been translated into script? All of that stuff. So if you're very interested in Vedic astrology and want to learn, come with me and let's go step by step. It's a very fun journey. So I thought that for those who are avid of Vedic astrology, you can always look. It's also interesting to know, what the world is trying to tell us karmically, vibrationally, because in reality, stories are metaphors that help our psychology and our mind understand reality, and they also help us make better choices. Why? Because stories usually help us project. The last reason why I'm doing this is because I think actually the casting has done really well. And the director of the movie being Denis Villeneuve, I think he's one of the greatest directors alive right now. I really like personally the way and his style of directing. He made a couple of movies already that I'm very keen on. So this should be interesting. I must say before I jump into this that I haven't seen the movie. So all of this I'm going fresh into prediction. I have read the book, but I didn't see the movies yet. So I'm taking this from a point of view of prediction only and going by what I see in the astrological chart, which is what you have here. So slide by slide we will go into. Let's have a bird's eye view of what the Dune novel is about. So it was written in 1965 by American author Frank Herbert. He used to be a journalist, and in his interviews he would always say that he's very curious. So in the time that he wrote this novel, he was very preoccupied about the environment. So that's why he chose to openly, speak about it. Now, the way that he found himself is the political environment was not so favorable. So what he decided to do is he decided to use symbolism, where he took us to a planet where the resource that he was intending to speak about was not exactly oil, as in our world. So he's trying to put the environment a little bit out of context, just to show that human nature shows up where there's a resource that is coveted, and then what happens around that. So in our case, in this planet, it's about oil. And in Arrakis, it's about a spice called Melange. So this novel is so beloved that it's the best sci-fi novel By those who know, they have named it the best sci-fi novels. Star Wars has been inspired by it. And it is also a direct response to the other great novel, which is Foundation by Isaac Asimov. It won the Nebula Award for Best Novel. So Nebula is like the Oscars of novels for sci-fi. He also won the Hugo Award in 1966. It is a series of 6 novels, so it spans. It's extremely long. The timeline is extremely long. Cinema adaptations of the novel have proven to be notoriously difficult. So it's not the first time that somebody tries to adapt Dune into a movie. It's been done a few times. So now let's go into what the novel is about. I'm gonna try not to spoil it for you, but what you should know is it is the human race. So the planet Earth no longer exists. It's been gone for ages. It's been repurposed as a garden at the moment that we find the novel going on. And something very interesting has happened over the centuries. Human beings have realized that artificial intelligence, it's actually a danger. So there has been they call it the jihad against the machines. So we find ourselves in a time and place where technology, robotic technology, calculational technology has been banned. So this has given rise to the human being having to do everything in an analog way, let's say, with their own mind, with the own human body. The way that interstellar travel is done is by consuming a resource that in this case only grows in the planet Arrakis, which is, Arrakis is also called Dune. It's a desert planet. And the spice is called the spice melange. This spice has side effects. The side effects are usually, it prolongs life. So the people that try the spice live on for long spans of time, longer than a normal human would. And it also creates immediate addiction. And the other thing that it gives some sort of foresight into the past and into the future. So the people that consume it are able to connect to their ancestral memory, and they are also able to connect with time and space and foresee what is there to come in the future. So we will see that in the universe, how it's set up. The great houses of lore, one of them being the protagonist's father's house, they have a lot of power in the empire. So basically when we find ourselves in time and space, there's 2 great houses competing for the dominion of Arrakis. Now, why is the planet very important? Arrakis is very important because it is the part of the world, of the universe, where the spice melange grows. It only grows in Arrakis. So it's a very coveted planet. And it is very coveted by the great houses because whoever controls Arrakis controls the universe. It gives us an insight on what happens, when you exploit a planet too much, what happens to the ecology of the planet. There is, of course, the religious insights of the local people of the planet, what their vision is of the world, the stories they tell. They're waiting for a messiah that will unite them and that will unite the empire. And that messiah turns out to be the protagonist of the movie, Paul Atreides. Now, there is also a group of women called the BENE GESSERIT. So it's a deeply religious group of people that in the background control all the politics of the universe and the universe of Dune. It also has to do with technology, and the role of technology in life. It has to do a lot with politics. In the politics that by human nature we have, when it comes to balance and exploitation of a resource. Again, it is a metaphor for oil, and the noble houses represent the factions competing for that resource that at some point is going to run out. And one of the most important things that we will see in the astrological analysis is that we have these sandworms that keep appearing in the novel of Dune. And the sandworms are a metaphor for dragons. In astrology, we know the dragons as Rahu and Ketu. So, what happens unconsciously is Dune is an extremely psychological occult novel, but it is also a novel that, you know, apart from being psychological and very deep in its, you know, analysis of the dark recesses of the human mind, it also analyzes what happens, you know, in the outer world. So it also has to do a lot with human emotion and the way that human emotion can take over our logic. So you have lust, greed, anger, reaction interacting in the planet of Dune. Okay, so let's jump right into the analysis of the astrological chart. The first thing that we need to do always when we analyze a chart is to look at the ascendant or the Lagna. So here in the North Indian chart that we have, we're going to start with House 1, House 2, House 3, House 4, House 5, House 6, House 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So these are the houses. If you don't know how they're arranged, no problem. There's many tutorials online that can teach you. But I'm just going to go ahead in this video and assume that you know the houses. So in house number 1 in the Lagna right here, we have the planet Saturn. So Saturn's in the ascendant and it is retrograde in the sign of Capricorn. So the Lagna being in Capricorn means that we are presented with austerity, but also with a game of very high stakes. So what we can see just from the beginning of the Lagna is that this is going to be a story of corporations where the stakes are very high. Remember, Capricorn tends to go for high attainments, high social roles. Capricorn also tends to be the sign of dutifulness. Capricorn is an earth sign, so the value is truth. And it tends to go for material attainments, so it always tends to solidify into corporations. So here the story is going to be about corporations probably fighting for a resource. And then the story is going to be about a leader. We know this because Saturn is in its own sign. So there will be a leader that will take the people that live in austerity to a very high attainment. So again, we know this because, you know, I've read the book, but I'm simply telling you what we can see right from the chart. So Saturn being retrograde in the Lagna also indicates that there's a lot of questions inside of him. It's not like he knows immediately that the responsibility is going to be his. Sometimes he's going to go back on himself. And what is the way that he's going to discover his mission in life? So I think the people of the Saturn tribe are the ones that are going to show him. Who are these people of the Saturn tribe? Well, there are the inhabitants of Dune. So the people that live in the austerity in the planet Dune. The nakshatra in the Lagna is the Sravana Nakshatra. So this is a very special nakshatra because in Vedic Astrology is the only one that belongs to Lord Vishnu. So what we're going to see early on in the movie, I think, is that there's a voice. Almost it's like a divine incantation or like a divine voice that is calling the protagonist towards the mission. So there is this sense of an ethereal personality or a pool that is almost predestined for the main character so that he can take things to the next level. Shravan is also, it literally means to listen. So what one of the predictions is that probably this movie is going to win Oscar for the best sound score, the best soundtrack. I know that Hans Zimmer has done the music, so it is very probable that he may take home the award for the movie. And the other thing that we can see is that Saturn in his special aspect is aspecting the third house, which is the house of music. So what we can predict also is that the music is going to come from a land of austerity. So no wonder, right, that the posters and most of the dresses in the movie, they're black or sand color, and that we are taken into an environment where we definitely have austerity. Capricorn is the sign of business, so it is a very business-oriented movie. And this is one of the predictions that George Herbert made back when he was planning on the book. He lived in a time where the world was divided into two factions, which were basically the East and the West. The West represented by the liberal thought of capitalism as given in the Americas, freedom. And then the East represented mostly by Russia in that time, the power that the Russians had. But he imagined a world where a resource would be coveted and there will no longer be two powers. There will be more than two powers, and those powers were the very powerful corporations. So those are the noble houses in the universe of Dune. Here we are presented with House Arrakis and mainly House Harkonnen, and they're always, fighting for the supremacy of the spice. Because whoever controls that planet has the biggest empire and the best business in the universe. So it is a metaphor again for oil. Why we are going and receiving this message right now, I think unconsciously everybody's trying to realize that it's time to move away from the extreme dependence that we have on that material. In the book, what happens is that at some point Paul realizes that the greed and all the fighting and the coveting is coming from actually, putting so much importance in one element in the universe. So, he has his decisions to make. I won't spoil it for you. So, again, Shravan means to listen carefully. So, again, for Paul Atreides, what this is going to mean is that he has a series of mentors that he respects and that he follows. And also it means that he will be very in touch with some sort of divine scriptures or divine prophecies. I don't know how they're going to manage it in the movie, but it is very present in the ascendant of the chart that he will be acquiring knowledge. And it's almost like the knowledge comes to him, but it comes from the past. So it must be the part where he's reconnecting with, past iterations of himself. And what he's going to do wherever he goes is, of course, he's going to seek for qualified teachers, people that are going to be elderly to him. So the elders in the movie of Dune are going to be dark figures, not exactly light and jolly like Jupiter will be, but more like dark, serious, structured-oriented figures. Now, the next thing that we're going to review here is that in direct aspect to that ascendant Lagna, which is a Kendra right here. And usually when the Kendras or the Lord of Kendras are strong and well positioned, it marks a very good destiny for the nativity. So in this case, having taken the daytime and place of birth of the premier of Dune, what we can see is this chart. So both the Lagna and the seventh house are dignified. Now, the second question that we ask in our journey when we're analyzing a Vedic astrological chart is we're going to ask ourselves, where is the moon? So the moon is the most important planet. We first analyze the Lagna and we ask ourselves, where is the Lord of Lagna? So in this case, the Lord of Lagna is itself in the Lagna because Saturn rules Capricorn. So that makes it for a very, very strong Lagna. And then the second question we're going to ask is, where is the moon? So remember, the moon represents the mother, and it also represents our mind, our emotion in which we are approaching life. So it's like the lens through which we are seeing life. So the lens in this house is the lens of intimate relationships. So what we can foretell, since the moon is in Cancer, is that Paul is going to have nurturers that are very concerned with his well-being, that being his mother. And later on, his mother is played by Lady Jessica. She is not a queen, she's a concubine of his father, Duke Leto. And all of this is because he can't take her as a wife, because there is the political pressure that he has that he may have to marry somebody from the strong houses. So he cannot have Lady Jessica. But Lady Jessica, however, is part of the BENE GESSERIT, which is like the largest, we could say, religious institution in the universe of Dune. And her duty is to influence House Atreides towards peace. So Lady Jessica is very influential in the movie. And of course, what we're going to be seeing, I think, is the pivotal character during the entire movie. Because she's actually the one protecting Paul, and she's actually the one that knows. Deep down inside, she's the one that will protect and nurture his destiny as so-called, I think, we can clearly say, I think, that he's like a messianic figure. That's what he represents in the universe of Dune, somebody that brings tremendous change and like the fulfillment of a prophecy. So the only one that knows this and will encourage him to his last consequences is Lady Jessica, of course. So the moon being in the 7th house, it is very well positioned, strong in Kendra in its own sign of Cancer. So it tells us of a very nurturing mother. And later on, he will encounter his partner, which in this case is played by Zendaya. The character is called Chani. So Chani is going to be also like his desert mother. I think she's going to take him through the motions of the desert and teach him how to survive. Remember, there's a relationship between Saturn in the Lagna and the moon in the 7th house. So that shadow of finding love in the desert, intimacy in the desert, nurturing home in the desert is going to be present in the movie. The nakshatra is Pushyami, so it is considered the most auspicious nakshatra. And it is the nakshatra that is considered the most auspicious for spiritual pursuits. So what we're going to see in Lady Jessica, played by Rebecca Ferguson, is that in a way, the person that connects Paul Atreides to spirituality is his mother. And in the same way, when the character played by Zendaya, Chani, comes into the play, she will also be some sort of spiritual conduit or a vessel for spirituality for Paul, where he's going to be understanding why the spice is so important. Actually, the first time he intakes the spice will be either in the company of his mother or Chani. There is also an element in the book, it's called the water of life, the waters of life. And that's the ultimate test that Paul has to pass. So it is no coincidence that we have a water sign and that, only women can survive the waters of life. But both Lady Jessica and Paul will have to pass the test to imbibe the waters of life, which gives him tremendous insight into the past, present, future, and actually the meaning of all things in the universe. So remember, nurturing is the essence of the star, and milk, water, mother, they're all signs of nurturing. It is also the star of the caregivers, and it's also the star of priesthood. So we know that his mother Jessica is a priestess for the Bene Gesserit. She's actually a very high priestess in the Bene Gesserit rule. So you see how astrology is working here. So it encourages to contemplate the strengths of morality that cause prosperity and victory. So ultimately what the Bene Gesserit are looking for is prosperity in the universe. But what Lady Jessica is doing, by going against a little bit of the dictate of the Bene Gesserit, which indicates that only females should be born to the priestess of the Bene Gesserit, and Rebecca goes ahead and she has a son. So she breaks that rule. But, having in mind that the goal is the prosperity and the victory of the kingdom, really, and that it will bring peace and a much needed change because there's so much corruption in the empire over this spice. So all of this is playing out. Again, it's a love story and it's a motherhood story. But since the shadow of Saturn is there and since the shadow of the corporations are there, that shadow gives us the story in a very desertic place. Another thing that we can make a direct correlation to is the Muslim countries. Like if you see mostly, they are, even in their flags and in the colors that they wear, they have symbol of Saturn there because they are wearing black. And also, like the symbol is the moon and the stars, so it speaks about the night. And also, we have the desertic places where the oil is found. So again, it's a metaphor. And the universe is, again, giving the metaphor. The book was written so long ago, and it's no coincidence. And now the movie comes out in this star. So my prediction is that the movie will be quite successful. Although, I think people in general won't be able to digest the themes of the movie because I think it's going to touch upon very harsh themes. So it's not like a very feel-good movie. Another thing of the Saturn in the Lagna is that it's going to feel like a historical movie. It's going to feel like this really could have happened in history. So it's a movie that has a very serious tone to it, almost historical. And then the development of the characters, Moon being in Cancer, is, of course deep. They're not going to be caricatures of characters. they're going to be, the characters are going to be developed almost like if they exist in real life. So the next thing we're going to go ahead and ask ourselves is where the sun, and where is the Lord of the sign where the sun is positioned? Well, again, the sun is in its own sign. So notice how Saturn is in its own sign, Moon is in its own sign, and then the sun is in its own sign. But unfortunately, what happens right here is that the sun is in the 8th house, which is the house of death. And what does sun represent? Well, it represents this guy up here, Duke Leto. But it also represents the soul inside of the main character. So the 8th house being the house of the occult, the house of drugs, the house of the unknown, the house of psychology, the house of sex, the house of affairs, the house of everything that has to do with what is inside and nobody can see. So it is the house of the occult and the house of death. So we can already see from the astrological chart that this guy right here, Paul's father, he's meant to die. So there's going to be a treason and there's going to be death. And remember that Leo represents a very strong character and an impulse to be oneself. It is also a sign of nobility. So out of all the signs, the most noble sign we can say, that would be Leo. Just as Capricorn is the most materialistic and, goal-oriented, corporation-oriented sign, Leo is a sign of kingdom and nobility. So the father of Paul is a nobleman known as Duke Leto, and he has been sent to Arrakis to be able to rule over the land, and he's bringing all of his family. However, do remember that Lady Jessica is not his wife. Lady Jessica is his concubine. So we can see that tendency right here. Now, why is he there in Arrakis? Because of the spice. And do remember that the spice is a drug. So, most of the times with my clients, when I see that there's planets in the 8th house, there's always issues with death, psychology, or maybe even alcohol and drugs. Because it is a house of sin. The 3 houses of sin or of purification in this life will be the 6th, the 8th, and the 12th. So people that have planets, a lot of planets in these houses, have come here to liberate themselves from that. So the 8th house is the house of moksha or liberation. So Duke Leto is going to get liberation from the spice precisely, but it's going to cost him his life. One of the phrases that is very popular in Dune, it comes out in the first pages, is when Paul says, "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death. Trust brings total obliteration. I will not fear." So, one of the tests that he undergoes is this test where all the women that are, chosen by the Bene Gesserit, they go through this test, which is a test of fear. And, there's a needle that they put, it's got a very deadly poison. So it's to test if the person can override her instincts. In this case, Paul can override his instincts with higher consciousness. Because if he takes the hand away from the box that causes extreme pain, then he'll be stung by the needle, which tells us a lot about this Ketu here in Scorpio. That's the needle right there. He undergoes this test, and the test is about fear, also about resistance. But in order to get his powers, Paul must pass a test of fear. So it's his initiation. They're going to test him to see if he is a candidate to receive the spice. And then once he does, he will be able to wield tremendous power that the spice gives him. So it is a test of character, really. And this is all told by this sun right here. Remember, the sun represents the soul. Just as the moon represents the mind, the sun represents the soul of the main character. So also here, when we see that his father is about to die, what that does to a character psychologically is very crude, is a very, very strong test of character. So, going forward in the story, this is going to haunt Paul throughout his entire life, even when he becomes the chosen one, so to speak. So he has occult powers. The powers that he has are psychological. They're We can even say like transdimensional. It's almost like you know, in induced by drugs. And remember also that Sun is aspected by Jupiter in Aquarius. So this is very interesting because Jupiter in Aquarius in the second house, you know, always tells us, always tells us that the person is wealthy. Whenever you see Jupiter in the second house, it also tells us that the person is very learned. So, you know, Paul is not a simple character because he knows how to fight. He knows politics. He knows diplomacy. He's well versed in the universe. He's well read. And he's had the best teachers. Now, what is interesting about this story is that Jupiter in Aquarius right here represents that he actually has a new wave of consciousness that is going to affect the entire universe. Remember, Jupiter is an expansive planet, so everything that Jupiter touches expands and expands beyond the limits of the single personality in time and space. So what Jupiter is going to do right here is he's going to help Paul expand his consciousness across time and space. Now, in what way we're going to see the perpetuation of that good friend and good guide in life? We're going to see this Jupiter in Aquarius in the figure of the character that Jason Momoa portrays, which is Duncan Idaho. Now, Duncan Idaho, what will happen to him during the next movies is that they keep cloning him. The emperors that come after Paul, as the emperors that come before, you know, he's of such good character and he's of such noble character that all the kings are going to want to keep him as a trusted member of, you know, of the royal court. And so they'll keep cloning him. And that is the indicative. So he will always give the right advice and he'll be extremely noble. He's a good friend. He'll be a good friend to Paul. And he'll be a good friend to the children of Paul, you know, advising them. He will be cloned numerous times. So the character of Duncan Idaho perpetuates throughout centuries. So it's interesting that here we have that aspect of that character. Here it also denotes wealth. So if you're asking yourself, you know, generally for the movie, if it's going to do very good in the box office, I would say, you know, it'll do quite good after some time. I think it'll bring tremendous profits for the, you know, it'll be a franchise that'll be very profitable. But since both planets are retrograde, we're not going to see the glory of this character in the first movie. And probably we're not going to see the economical success right away. You know, it'll have to wait for 6-7 months to get success. Now, the other thing that this foretells is that being a classical planet in a classical house, in a house of wealth, it means that it'll do well with academics. Later on, we're going to analyze this next, which is Mercury in its own sign and exalted in the 9th house, conjunct fallen Venus. So what does that mean for women? We're analyzing it right now, but it basically, Oscar-wise, it means that the screen adaptation and the writing, people are going to love it. And it's going to do very good with the critics. So even though general public won't understand the story right away, I think it'll take until the time the second movie comes out. It will become a cult movie. Like people will reference it. People will love it. I think it's going to be considered a work of art, you know, for the time to come. It will perpetuate. But one of the things is the Academy is going to love it. So there's going to be Oscars involved, I think. And, you know, possibly when the saga is ended, it'll even take a good price home. Okay, now finally, Mercury is exalted in the 9th and conjunct fallen Venus. So this is going to play very interestingly as well, because this right here represents the Bene Gesserit, which is the religious organization in Dune, the religious clan in Dune, and it's all made of women. And these women use logic. It's almost like they're playing chess with all the houses, and they're trying to veer the universe into the ideal outcome, which is they're trying to produce the Messiah, so to speak. And you know, what happens to them is it happens one step before they were planning it. So basically what they're trying to do is they were trying to have a girl, the daughter of Lady Jessica is going to be a girl, and then they were trying to marry her with the son or somebody from the house of Harkonnen, which is the, you know, the opposition. And from that, they were trying to get the Messiah that everybody's been waiting for. What happens is that Paul comes in one generation before, and it happens. So the whole plan for centuries of the Bene Gesserit, they're like playing chess, and they have a superior mother and everything. What they're really trying to do is to produce this singularity, I would say. So now, how do we see this play out in the movie? Well, the ninth house, as you know, is the house of Guru, is the house of teachers, is the house of religion, it is the house of Dharma, it is the house of everything that is righteous. So the Bene Gesserit are going to be a very righteous organization, and they have power and influence over the other houses, especially because they have logic, and they also use the spice, and then another power that is called the water of life, which they also take. So it's these are the two most powerful substances in the world of Dune. The spice everybody can take, but it causes immediate addiction. The waters of life does not cause addiction, but it'll kill any man that takes it. So actually, Paul is the first man to ever survive it. So he's put in a situation where, you know, he has to take it. Then Venus is fallen. So this is very interesting because Venus falls in Virgo. But when a fallen planet conjuncts an exalted planet, so what happens, it obtains Nicha Bhaga, so it has attained liberation from that debilitation, and it actually becomes like exalted. So what we can see is that in the Bene Gesserit, even in the movies, you know, the women have no hair, and it's almost like they renounce their femininity. They're like nuns, and you know, so we will see this, that you know, this astrological aspect is playing there, right? And being exalted Mercury in its own sign in the ninth house, that is a Lakshmi stan. So Lakshmi Devi resides in house 5, house 9, and house 1. So you know, remember, house 1 is both a Kendra and a Lakshmi stan. So being with a strong planet position there, and then having exalted planet in its own sign, which is Mercury in Virgo, you know, it hails very well for the critics. So I think the movie is going to have excellent critics. And you know, one of the things that is going to be praised for, I think, is going to be music and also script. The acting is also going to be praised, especially the women. I think they're going to take home the prize for good acting. And perhaps even this boy, Paul Atreides, will take a mention there. So it is the Bene Gesserit, they're guiding the intelligent design of the universe, so to speak, trying to veer it away from chaos. Of course, there's so many variables. And Venus Fallen, it tells us of a story where women are very beautiful, but they're always under the, you know, they're always belonging to the role that is assigned to them. So it's almost like they cannot move from the box assigned to them because they're trying to keep the order. I would say the order, the social order is, you know, the women keep it in this movie. Women cannot be so sensual, rather they must yield to the oath of the Bene Gesserit. So Venus in Virgo also rules Rahu, which is very interesting. Because in the next slide, we're going to see that this Rahu and Ketu, you know, if you've seen anything about Dune, is that there's these sandworms. So the head of the dragon, you know, is in an earth sign. And then that earth sign is ruled by Venus fallen in Virgo, again an earth sign. So, you know, the worms are right here because it's an earth dragon. And the earth dragon is guarding the spice. And the spice is a psychological, as given by the sign Scorpio, and it's used for interstellar travel, which is the 11th house of you know, friendships, alliances, and traveling. So you know, even the dragon is here, and it's lorded by this fallen Venus. So where can we see the spice melange and the power of the spice melange to have tremendous influence of the universe of Dune? We see it in the 9th house because of that fallen Venus lording the north node of the moon in Taurus in the 5th house, which you know, allows the people to see beyond anything that other people see. And it also tells us, this we'll see in the next slide, but it also tells us about the children of Paul being foreigners. Rahu is a foreigner, so Rahu being in the house of children means that, the children of Paul, I don't know if we're going to see them in the movie, but the children of Paul are going to be from a foreign culture and are going to speak a foreign language, and they're going to come from a foreign woman. So this is very, very interesting. The woman, the mother that is going to mother these children, is probably somebody that is very smart, very respected, but is also very repressed in her femininity. So we're usually going to see Zendaya wearing these, suits to keep the water inside. The freemen, which is the people of the desert, they wear these suits so that they can conserve the water, because water is a very scarce resource in the planet of Dune. Again, the scarce resource comes from Saturn being in the ascendant. So, the whole universe is under, the shadow of austerity. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting astrologically, because remember that Rahu and Ketu are the unconscious. So it's what lies beneath the surface. And this being a metaphor for oil, it's like, imagine the size of the dependence, the unconscious psychological dependence, coming from the belief that the world needs to run on oil. Well, in Dune, what has happened is that this belief, right, this unconscious dragon, it lurks in the sand and it protects that coveted spice. And it's a dragon. Here it is. They call it the sandworms, but it's actually a dragon. And a dragon is a tremendous force of unconscious power, that everybody's afraid of in the universe of Dune. So if we take it to our own planet, can you imagine the size of the dragon of, that thought that, we need to run on oil always. And the karma that this is generating. So dragons usually be, they'd be monsters, but also they would be, unconscious forces of nature. Every one of us contributes a little bit, to the dragon being fatter and fatter every day. So in the universe of Dune, everybody's contributing to these, sandworms being humongous. And they're very respected in that world. So, what does it mean that Ketu is in Scorpio? Ketu is the belly of the dragon, and then Rahu represents the head of the dragon. So Ketu represents everything that is unconscious. So, there is a drive for having the spice melange because it's just convenient, and nobody's found another way to live. It's just status quo. It is accepted that it's like that. And, there's a lot of, a very repressive culture that goes around that, and the monsters that are created. So on one side we have that guy over there, played by Bautista, which is the Beast Rabban from the House Harkonnen. And then there's also the Emperor of the House Harkonnen, who are, terrible monsters of a very repressive type of house, military, exploitation-oriented. They're not people-oriented, they're resource-oriented, exploitation-oriented. They're, full-on capitalists in the, in the normal sense of the word, that, they won't stop at nothing until they have the empire, everything they want for themselves. So, that's a dragon, and, the amount of darkness that they will undergo is tremendous. And then you have, the obsession. And the obsession in the world of Dune, represented by Rahu. Rahu represents obsession. Rahu in Taurus, in the 5th house, represents the obsession with the spice, and also the obsession with the new. Remember when Rahu is in Taurus, it's all about Paul. His entire journey is all about finding his own values, what he believes. One of the things that George Herbert wanted to give as a purport to this movie is he was encouraging people to not just take heroes at base value, but also to question them. Why should we follow and build a tradition around a hero? People should keep reminding them of their own humanity, their own mortality, their own capacity to make mistake. What happens, a hero gets promoted and elected, and then people just follow them. Once they're in a position of power, people once follow them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who had a tremendous success in youth or success once, if the character doesn't continue growing, it doesn't mean forward they're going to have all the answers. And that's what will happen to Paul throughout the saga, that he will find himself in a position that is almost inevitable, obsessed, with wielding the power that has been granted to him, and not knowing exactly how to go forward. He goes on a revolution to change the status quo. So one of the things that this Rahu in Taurus is reminding us, as humanity, is that when we go away from oil into a new source of energy, not just to go with it, but to really stop and analyze, with logic, which is given by the Lord Venus in Virgo, not only what is good for our consumption or way of living, but to preserve the environment long term. And of course, it also foretells about the always present dread of war that we may have over these obsessions that as humanity we carry. And these obsessions, again, they're like worms that live in the unconscious, the archetypal unconscious of our society. So just as in Dune the sandworms are protecting the spice, you can go and wonder the size of the dragon protecting the oil industry in our world now that we are in transition. One of the things I remember is that when they were asking the director why he had become a movie director, he said in a young age he read Dune and he was just obsessed with it. He couldn't, he read it many times. And it just spoke to him in such a deep level. And for many, many years, he was trying to make it. And, of course, it's this movie is traditionally known for being extremely hard to adapt because of the depth of the character and, the span of the saga. And, it's not very commercial to put into the world's face what is really wrong with the world. So, that's not very economically viable, to present people with a mirror of their own darkness. But, he said in one of his interviews that one of the reasons why, this movie was coming out this year, and you can see that major sagas are coming out this year. Foundation, the first great saga of science fiction, came out this year. Then, Dune is coming out, which is the greatest novel in science fiction of our world, right? And then in the end of the year, we're going to have The Matrix come back. And again, everything in 1 year. So what Denis Villeneuve was saying is that the reason why this movie is coming out now is because humanity is about to undergo a tremendous shift in so many areas. So, we have global warming, we have polarization of the factions in politics. The world is more connected than ever. We're running out of resource when it comes to oil. We're trying to look for a new way. And also what we're going to see is that, just as predicted by Frank Herbert, the world is no longer divided into two major superpowers. Actually, the superpowers are now the great corporations such as Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon. So these are the houses. These are the great houses. And, at the center of everything, of course, the resource is what fuels everything. So it is a story about obsession, and it is a call to attention. So this is why all these movies are coming out. The collective unconscious of people throws it out there to remind ourselves of our collective consciousness. It's not the first time that we've been there and that we've seen this. It is not the first time that we go through something like this in human history, but it is the first time we're going to do it so connected and not isolated from each other, and it's in a global perspective. So this is why we are told a story about a planet that is very particular, and it's a desert planet. So will this be our planet? I think deep down in our conscious, this is going to move us to think about things. So I definitely think there will be a second part, and I think people are really going to appreciate the call to attention. Just as in his time, Lord of the Rings was a call to attention, and The Matrix was a call to attention, to keep our values in the center. So now let's quickly finish, the fifth house. It is the house of children, creation, and it is the sign of Taurus ruled by Venus. So it foretells about Paul's descendants, his children being born in a foreign land, to a foreign culture, to a foreign language, to a foreign wife. So that is present there. Ketu in Scorpio in the 11th describes the secret knowledge from the tribe men of Dune. So these are the free men. They're people that came from the stars and settled in Dune. And they've been waiting for a long, long time to befriend their Messiah. So they've been waiting for it. And what you will see is after the movie ends, first, second movie, I think second movie will end. And what we will see is that Paul Atreides, being king of the freemen, he will send them to conquer all the galaxies with the new empire. They have a secret plot and a prophecy to overthrow the empire as it is right now. So Rahu and Ketu here represents, the human masters that are wielding the economy of the world and the degree of exploitation that an obsession over a resource can cause. It also represents Paul's sister. He will have a sister. He has one in the book. And I think in the play, in the movie, he will also have a sister, and it represents his antagonists. So the sister is very interesting because she will be also like an all-seeing individual, but she has a tendency towards darkness. So she is the human embodiment of the darkness that the family, being righteous and all, sustaining, the work for people, sustaining the status quo. The amount of pain and exploitation and karma that they've generated, right, by exploiting this world of Dune. So it comes out in the sister, and the sister is going to be a bit of a gray character. Very powerful as well, but very gray. So again, she is given here by this axis of Rahu being lorded by that fallen Venus. She was not planned, and then, somehow she's there by the time that Lady Jessica drinks the waters of life. So the child is born almost omniscient, so she can see past, present, and future. She has a deep insight into the minds of people and what should be and what shouldn't. And she has no filter, to be destructive, so she can be a destructive force. Rahu and Ketu represents the unconscious darkness looming in the minds of everyone, brought about from obsession, greed, and the exploitation of the world. So once again, this Dune saga, and what Paul represents, Paul basically represents the impulse in humanity, to come back, to establish a new order of things after exploitation has happened. At the moment, our world is going through a transition from capitalism and this idea that, to have more than enough is the goal of life. So in our generation, especially the next generation to come, what we're going to see is our world is going from a consciousness of exploitation to more of a consciousness of understanding that our planet is our shared home, and that the only way to preserve it is if we have values. If we rally behind leaders, and as communities we come up with values that are more in touch with what actually makes human beings happy. So these are universal values such as clarity or purity, such as kindness and compassion, truth in our dealings, and also, to fulfill our dharma, or our prescribed duty by our effort. So everybody has something to do, and we're all doing it. But if we do it based on a code that at its center, right, if we generate a culture that at its center does not have exploitation of resources, but rather at its center has the preservation of the joy and the fundamental rights of the human being, to put the heart and the soul of the human being at the center in its complete bloom into the full potential of what every soul hankers for, which is, a place where there can be dignity and expression and also, equality of opportunity. We'll very soon see that the culture that, this world is plagued with is one of exploitation, as much as can be harvested as quickly as possible, no matter the cost, and people fighting over a resource without realizing that, we cannot base life on an external resource, because there will never be enough of it to sustain a lifestyle of greed. Rather, what this story is telling us is that perhaps we want to create a culture where we really analyze what it is that, creates a stable society, and a society where everybody can actually be happy. It also has very high stakes on helping us understand that, putting all the power in one person, for sometimes it's sustainable, but for eternity it's not, it's not very sustainable. Cycles have to renew. Eventually all empires get corrupted. People, great leaders who once were, don't have all the answers always. So we continuously have to keep being curious, discovering, questioning our past choices. And we constantly have to keep coming back and analyzing, if the culture that we've generated still responds, to what we're trying to preserve. So back at home, after you watch Dune, just ask yourself, what are the 2 or 3 important things that you have realized are non-negotiable in life? And you will soon realize that most of the things that we do in life, that we consider happiness, have nothing to do with that. So, mainly people, what they say is people appreciate freedom, people appreciate family, people appreciate honesty, accountability, people appreciate sharing, people appreciate friendship. In the end of the day, that's why people fight to sustain realms of consciousness where these things are allowed. And it's a very, very beautiful thing that we may think of a possibility of generating a culture, again, where material objects are not at the center, or where resources are not at the center, where the belief that happiness is having more is not at the center. It's a false belief, and it'll only lead to destruction and greed and fighting. It is better to generate a culture where we understand that maybe love your brother, and be grateful to the universe for the opportunity, right? Jesus famously once said, love God with all your heart and love your brother like I have loved you. That's a very beautiful culture. I think if we put love and service at the center of our cultures for the generations to come, we will have a much more peaceful world, a much greener world, a world where, we can establish a kingdom of consciousness rather than a kingdom of greed that only benefits but a few instead of all. So these are my 2 cents on the movie Dune, my reflection on it. I haven't watched it, but after looking at the astrological chart, I'm really looking forward to it. And, maybe once again, it's been sent because the message is clear. I do think that it's about time humanity woke up from that spell of thinking that more means more happiness, more resources mean more happiness, and that we can come to realize that what we really value in the end of the day is our friends, our relationships, the quality of our character, the quality of our being towards the people that we love. So try to remember, and as always, try to be connected with the sources of divinity and God's love. So I pray that Goddess of Love, Srimati Radharani, bless you wherever you are. Radhe Radhe.